Well, this is the final week in our series looking at the gospel according to David. Last week we heard that David lived life to the fullest. Next week we're going to try something a little different. We're going to try Stump the Pastor Sunday. This is kind of like Ask Me Anything for church. So if you email me a faith question by this Friday, I'll draw them out of a basket and address them without preparing for the answers ahead of time. It'll be as best as I can do, as biblical as I can be, without preparation ahead of time. So if you want to try to stump the pastor, email me a question by Friday, August 28th, to be included when I record on Saturday. That's Cody at fpcl.org, stump the pastor. But for this final week in our series about David, we're going to look at one of David's defining characteristics, his commitment to relationships through some very trying times. Jesus actually had this very same characteristic, and we often talk about how we want our church to be defined by our commitment to relationships as well. In our main text today, we are back in 1 Samuel. Remember, that's before David was king. This text marks a transition for David. Before this, he was married to Saul's daughter, Michal. He was best friends with Saul's son, Jonathan. He had fame and respect for defeating Goliath. He was an honored part of the king's household. But then Saul realized that David might become king instead of his own son, Jonathan. So Saul decided to kill David while he could. Listen to how David's commitment to relationships changed the course of events. 1 Samuel chapter 19. Saul spoke with his son Jonathan and with all of his servants about killing David, but Saul's son Jonathan took great delight in David. Jonathan told David, "My father Saul is trying to kill you. Therefore be on guard tomorrow morning. Stay in a secret place and hide yourself. I will go out and stand beside my father in the field where you are, and I will speak to my father about you. If I learn anything, I will tell you." Jonathan spoke well of David to his father Saul, saying to him, "The king should not sin against his servant David, because he has not sinned against you, and because his deeds have been of good service to you. For he took his life in his hand when he attacked the Philistine," that's talking about Goliath, "and the Lord brought about a great victory for all of Israel. You saw it and rejoiced. Why then will you sin against an innocent person by killing David without cause?" Saul heeded the voice of Jonathan, and Saul swore, "As the Lord lives, he shall not be put to death." So Jonathan called David and related all these things to him. Jonathan then brought David to Saul, and he was in the presence of Saul as before. Again there was war, and David went out to fight the Philistines. He launched a heavy attack on them so that they fled before him. Then an evil spirit from the Lord came upon Saul, and as he sat in his house with his spear in his hand, while David was playing music, Saul sought to pin David to the wall with his spear. But David eluded Saul, so that he stuck the spear into the wall. David fled and escaped that night. Saul sent messengers to David's house to keep watch over him, planning to kill him in the morning. David's wife, Michal, told him, "If you do not save your life tonight, tomorrow you will be killed." So Michal let David down through the window. He fled away and escaped. Michal took an idol and laid it on the bed. She put a net of goat's hair on its head and covered it with the clothes. When Saul sent messengers to take David, she said, "He is sick." Then Saul sent the messengers to see David for themselves. He said, "Bring him up to me in the bed, that I may kill him." When the messengers came in, the idol was in the bed, and the covering of goat's hair on his head. And Saul said to Michal, "Why have you deceived me like this and let my enemy go so that he has escaped?" And Michal answered Saul, "He said to me, 'Let me go. Why should I kill you?'" Now David fled and escaped, and he came to Samuel at Ramah and told him all that Saul had done to him. He and Samuel went and settled at Naioth. This is the word of the Lord, so thanks be to God. I don't know about here in Colorado, but in Texas there is a time-honored tradition. Many fathers of high school-aged girls have a ritual they perform before every one of their daughters' first dates. The details differ, but the basic goal is to provide the high school boy with some disincentives for certain behaviors on the date. Some dads who are hunters might take the boy to their room where they have all of their kills displayed on the wall. Others might be cleaning their weapon while talking to the boy. Others were more subtle. I don't know if that's a thing everywhere, but in rural Texas, it was definitely part of the culture. And now I share this because I believe Saul in our text today got things a little backwards. I mean, he gave it a good try, right? He threatened David with a spear. I mean, that would have gotten my attention on a first date. But he didn't threaten David with the spear until after he had already married Saul's daughter, Michal. I think the horse has already left the barn, Saul. You're a little late to the party. I mean, you might think your family has some dysfunction, and it probably does, but Saul is like on a whole other level, right? Our text says, Saul sought to pin David to the wall with a spear, but David eluded Saul so that he struck the spear in the wall instead. Our text tells us that the source of Saul's murderous intent is rather simple. David keeps winning battles, and the people keep giving David credit for it instead of Saul. Saul is jealous of how the people see David. Pure and simple. He also, in his jealousy, sees the writing on the wall a little bit for his own lineage. If David is alive when Saul dies, he knows that David will probably wind up on the throne instead of his own son, Jonathan. Jealousy and fear of losing power, that is a dangerous combination. Those are some serious divisions. In fact, there are quite a few divisions that are or could be present in our text today. David would be well within his rights to strike back at Saul for trying to pin him on the wall with a spear. Jonathan would be well within his rights to undermine David as a potential rival. For Michal, it would be easy to see her side with her brother, with her father, with her clan, instead of her newly minted husband. And at the end of the text, Samuel the prophet could easily have sided with Saul, who was Samuel's own pick to be king, instead of David, who was God's pick, not Samuel's. Jonathan, though, cares more about his deep, abiding friendship with David than he cares about holding on to his own power. In his dialogue with his father, he appeals to doing what is right instead of doing what is expedient. He cares more about doing what is right than getting ahead. He was united with David in more important ways than he was divided. Now, Michal is in a tight spot, but she finds a way to help her husband without abandoning her father. She sees that she is united with David and with Saul in more important ways than she is divided. David had opportunities throughout the texts that we've read during this series, many opportunities to kill Saul, but he never did. He was committed to the Lord. He was committed to Israel's ability to defend itself against the Philistines, committed to his friendship with Jonathan. Those things were more important to him than the divisions between himself and Saul. Now, as we've said before, David was no fool. He ran away rather than sticking around for some more spear-throwing sessions. But he believed in certain things above and beyond the divisions between himself and Saul. He had higher values. One of the biggest questions embedded within this text, and indeed embedded within David's life, is a simple question to ask, but a hard one to answer in our own moments. Do our reasons for being united, for seeing ourselves as united, do those reasons outweigh the reasons to be divided? Do our reasons for being united outweigh our reasons for being divided? Or do our divisions outweigh our reasons for unity? On balance, are we more united or more divided? David had to answer that question with someone who was literally chucking spears at him. And interestingly, he decided that he was more united with Saul than he was divided. Why? What on earth could be more uniting than a spear is dividing? Some of that answer isn't on earth. I'm going to pull from other parts of David's life, but when he spared Saul's life multiple times, David called Saul the Lord's anointed. David saw their shared faith as the greatest source of unity. And he repeatedly refused to change God's timing. He saw his faith, which he shared with Saul, as the most important thing. Every other division paled in comparison to the unity they could claim through their commitment to God. Yes, I think we can say David had a much more real faith than Saul. Saul was very self-centered. Saul tried to use God for his own purposes, but he still worshiped the Lord instead of someone else. And that was enough for David to see himself as being on the same side in many respects as Saul, even when Saul was chucking spears at him. We see in our text today that David is willing to continue fighting against the Philistines, even after getting some pointy objects thrown at him by the king. After their shared faith, David also saw their shared nationality as a great source of unity. There were things that were just naturally important to all Israelites. And sometimes that meant he had to put his hard feelings aside, put down the internal divisions so that he could support the bigger shared values. We also see in our text today that David saw his deep and meaningful relationships as more important and more durable than the divisions that crop up. He was more committed to Jonathan as a friend than he was committed to getting his own way. So David found unity in the things that he saw as more important than the divisions. He found unity in his shared faith. He found unity in his commitment to relationships. And at a more base level, he found unity in some things with all Israelites, even the ones chucking spears at him. The question then turns around to face us. Do we find more reasons to be united than reasons to be divided? Some of that, a lot of that, depends on where we place our focus. The comedian Emo Phillips tells of a time he saw a guy laying down in a gutter, looking completely distraught and worried that he might harm himself. Emo went over to him, and here's how that conversation went. Emo said, "Tell me what's wrong." And the man said, "Nobody loves me." I said, "God loves you. Do you believe in God?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Are you a Christian or a Jew?" He said, "A Christian." I said, "Me too." "Protestant or Catholic?" He said, "Protestant." I said, "Me too." "What franchise?" He said, "Baptist." I said, "Me too." "Northern Conservative Baptist or Northern Liberal Baptist?" He said, "Northern Conservative Baptist." I said, "Me too." "Northern Conservative Baptist Great Lakes region or Northern Conservative Baptist Eastern region?" He said, "Northern Conservative Baptist Great Lakes region." I said, "Me too." "Northern Conservative Baptist Great Lakes Region Council of 1879 or Northern Conservative Baptist Great Lakes Region Council of 1912? He said, "Northern Conservative Baptist Great Lakes Region Council of 1912. And I said, "Heretic!" and pushed him back down into the gutter. Now that may be a joke, but it also might hit pretty close to home. In theory, Christians everywhere should feel more united than divided. We can go down this long list, like Emo Phillips' story, of ways that we are on the same side, reasons, things that we believe in together. We can go down this long list, but then we get to the one or a few where we don't. And that's where we tend to place our focus. In theory, Christians everywhere should feel far more united with each other than divided because we share an eternal destination. We share an unfathomable and undeserved love. All of us do. We have all been adopted into the same family through Jesus. But that's just the theory. Historically, Christians haven't been really any better than anyone else at seeing what unites us. Wars have been fought over church structure. People have been executed for their differing views on communion. When I was in seminary, one of my professors warned me that one of the fastest ways you can jeopardize your role as pastor of a church is to change the color of the carpet in the sanctuary. Incidentally, that's actually one of the things we've looked at as part of our building renovation plan. So maybe my days are numbered here. The Royal Blue Camp is going to have my head if I favor the forest green option. Jesus himself framed this pretty directly. In John 13, verses 34 and 35, Jesus said, "A new commandment I give to you. Love one another. As I have loved you, so also you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another." We are commanded by Jesus to love one another as he loved us. That's a very high bar. Our love for one another is actually supposed to be our number one witness to the world. That has historically not been the case within Christianity. But may it be true of us at First Pres Littleton. Maybe love for one another is not true elsewhere, but may it be true of us right here and right now. May they know that we are Christians by the love that we have for one another. We've been a church for a while that has people that don't all think alike. We've been a church with a diversity of thought that is not easy to find these days. And I can tell you it is not easy to maintain these days. Our church leadership articulated this as one of the values of our church, to demonstrate the love of Christ at all times, even when politics or theology might divide us. May that be true of us. We have a significant number of people in our church who will vote on opposite sides in this election cycle nevertheless. May they know that we are Jesus' followers by the love that we have for one another. We have a significant number of people in our church who focus on different parts of the Bible to come to different theological stances on some of the hot-button issues facing the global church nevertheless. May they know that we are Jesus' followers by the love that we have for one another. We have a significant number of people in our church who, with completely different takes on how safe it is to worship in person right now during COVID-19, nevertheless. May they know that we are Jesus' followers by the love that we have for one another. Christianity has not been great historically at demonstrating love despite our differences. Many churches, many Christians right now are not demonstrating love despite our differences, nevertheless. May they know that we at First Pres Littleton are Jesus' followers by the love that we have for one another. May that be true of us. This is not an easy task. I know that. I know that hearing this, there are many people who are maybe thinking, I don't want to be on the same side. I don't want to love someone with those divisions that we have right now. I want to write them off. I know it's not an easy task. But David stuck with his bigger values even when a spear had been chucked at him. Are we made of that kind of stuff? Walking away from each other, that's easy. Seeing our differences as greater than our shared faith in Jesus, that's easy. Turning on each other would be easy. Only talking to those who agree with you, that's easy. But Jesus never called us to easy. Demonstrating the love of Christ is not easy. Loving as Jesus loved was not easy. The way that Jesus loved was not easy. In Matthew chapter 7, Jesus told us, enter through the narrow gate. For wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate, narrow is the road that leads to life, and only a few find it. May we find the narrow gate together here at First Pres Littleton. May the narrow way be our way. May it be true of us. As most of you know, you probably heard before that the New Testament was written in Greek. You might have also heard in your lifetime of sermons, the Greek word for fellowship is koinonia. It's a word that came to be used to describe the life of the early church, and it very literally means a relationship among fellows. But that is only possible if you can see the other people in your church as your fellows. There must be something or some things that form a common bond larger than the things that might divide you. For the early church, that they were the fellowship of Jesus. Plain and simple. Jesus was the one thing that could unite those early churches that were comprised of wealthy widow patrons, wandering refugees, craftsmen, slaves, thinkers, and outcasts, all in the same place. Jesus was the one thing that united them. Those people would not mix and mingle together with each other in 1,000 years without their faith in Jesus. But through Jesus, they became fellows. They became part of a world-changing fellowship. May that fellowship, may that koinonia be true of us here at First Pres Littleton. Sisters and brothers, David was committed to his bigger values even when Saul was chucking a spear at him. Even then, he saw their shared faith in the Lord. He saw their shared status as Israelites and their shared relationships as outweighing those divisions. Jesus said that the world will know that we are his followers by loving one another as he loved us. Does our shared faith in Jesus outweigh the spears that we might throw at one another? I believe it does. I believe it can. But I hope we don't just think that. May it be true of us, right here, right now. Amen.